Hey guys, welcome. We are going to continue talking about evolution. And so far we know that evolution is a process that happens over time, something that happens over generations, right? And it is the process through which adaptations happen in organisms. And these adaptations are supposed to help them survive better in the future, right? In the future organisms in which they are being inherited in. And similarly, we are going to learn about a person who had a very important role when it comes to the evolution or evolutionary studies. And his name is Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin was actually a young man, a researcher, who left England on a ship called the HMS Beagle. It was a 5-year cruise around the world, and he eventually, on his cruise, collected thousands and thousands of plants and animal species for his research. He was actually amazed by the diversity of life that he encountered, and he wrote down his observations about every collection that he had, about and related it to evolution. This evidence actually led him to propose a new theory about how evolution might work, and that is called natural selection. Natural selection is a theory which tells us that those adaptations that favor survival has a stronger chance of being passed down from ancestors to their offsprings. And those that are less favorable for survival or for that organism to survive or live is not very often passed down. And that's natural selection. So when he was on his cruise, the HMS Beagle stopped on the Galapagos Islands. And this is actually located about 960 kilometers west of South America. And there, Charles Darwin actually observed that finches are actually different from those found in the mainland. And he also noted that the main difference was in their beaks. Now, if you look at the pictures here, you can see that these are all finches, but their beaks look very different, right? And even here, right, now you can see that here it's a seed-eating species, right? And over here it's a leaf-eating species. So everything differed based on the kind of food that they ate. And Darwin assumed or concluded that the finch had ancestors that migrated from the mainland and found themselves in the Galapagos Islands somehow. And they had to adapt to the food that was available. And when they were adapting, their beaks also kind of changed their shape to allow them to make that adaptation more smooth for the upcoming generations. And he began to think about why they became different from each other. And over many generations, they had no choice but to evolve, right? So that they can make sure they had enough food. Now, if you look at the picture here, we know that the ancestral finch species looked specifically like this. But over time, they adapted and they had multiple descendant species. Some of them were leaf-eating, some of them were seed-eating, some ate cone. And it really depended on which part of the world they had to survive in. And each group of finches became more and more isolated from other groups, and this allowed them to adapt to their surroundings and to pass down those favorable characteristics or traits that would help them more to survive and reproduce. And when Darwin returned to England from his voyage, he began to develop a more concrete theory about how these adaptations evolved. Now, from geologists, Darwin learned that Earth was formed very slowly over a long period of time. Its surface also changed, right? Through natural processes like sedimentation and erosion. Now, Darwin reasoned that the population of organisms changed slowly as environment slowly changed. And now again, this is because the population had no choice but to adapt to the environment that they were stuck in or were presented in, right? And if the environment changes rapidly, like a flood, or an earthquake or a volcanic eruption, a species could become extinct because they don't have that ability to adapt immediately to a new surrounding. All members have no choice but to die off completely. But if they have survived in that kind of environment for a very long time, of course they can adapt or pass down more favorable traits and traits and characteristics that will help them to survive and reproduce in that area. He also used fossil evidence to understand how species actually evolved over a long period of time. Charles Darwin found out that species that survived over millions of years ago actually still resembled living species. For example, if you look over here, this is an extinct giant, Glyptodon, okay? And this is no longer in our world. It's completely extinct, but it still represents to some extent a species of living organism called an armadillo, right? So we have no choice but to assume that maybe something happened over time, as a result of which there was evolution and they had to adapt to their new surroundings and eventually form a different body, in which they can probably maximize their survival rates and reproduce.